Welcome back. I'm Angela. This is Angela's Pantry Obsession, and we're in the kitchen today getting ready to stock the pantry. I'm making salsa today. I have hopefully enough to make maybe 2 batches, but I'll let my tomatoes tell me how many batches we're going to make. So my tomatoes are definitely coming in like rapid fire from the garden now. I feel like every year I'm plucking 1 to 2, and then out of nowhere it's like I've got a million tomatoes that are coming in. So I had been gone for 4 days, and I went ahead and picked before I left, and then I picked again the day that I came back. And I know you saw here in the beginning what I picked the day I came back, and so this is certainly going to just be round 1 of everything I'm doing with tomatoes. The tomatoes that I like to use for salsa are my big round, some would call them slicer tomatoes, and any tomatoes that are just, you know, kind of random type of tomatoes. I really don't like to use my paste tomatoes for salsa. I like to reserve as many of those as I can for when I'm making marinara sauce in the wintertime, as well as my pizza sauce. So they just cook down without as much liquid to cook off compared to these. This, you know, if I put a ton of these in a big pot, it would take quite some time to get all of the extra liquid absorbed, because you want your marinara sauce or pizza sauce, of course, to be cooked down and thick, and it doesn't let off quite as much juice as your big slicer type of tomatoes. But these make fantastic salsas because you don't necessarily want, you know, a thick, dry salsa. So you use whatever you have, use whatever you like and enjoy. I'm using various different types. Some of these aren't looking too hot, and so I'm going to slice through them and see if I can get any blemishes off. Hopefully I can just cut around a few of those spots. I also have all of these peppers from my garden. I've got all the spicy peppers and then quite a bit of just regular bell peppers. I'm sure I won't need all of the regular bell peppers. I might need to go pick a few more hot, depending on how many cups of tomatoes I have. And then of course I've got some garlic, some onions, and cilantro, and I will be adding vinegar and cumin to this recipe. This is a very simple, basic salsa. In days to come, I will be doing a black bean salsa, and I will be doing a very spicy jalapeno salsa. But today, it's just the normal salsa that you can enjoy eating with tortilla chips, over chicken, enchiladas, however you like to use salsa. It's a very basic, mild recipe. So behind me, I have 2 canners running. Those are pressure canners, but I'm using them as a water bath canner today. I have all of my supplies pretty much washed and ready for me to go. My jars are in, I don't know if I said, my jars are in the canners. I am having them at a very low simmer because we will be heating everything. So if I have hot food, my jars need to be hot. I've got my big stock pot here ready to go. I'm gonna get these all washed up, and then we'll get to chopping, and hopefully in no time get to filling our jars. I have a chicken bowl, and then I have the bowl that I will be using for the tomatoes that will go in my pot. So I'm going to get these chopped up, cleaned up. I need a cutting board actually. I have them cleaned up. Now I'm going to get them chopped up, I should say. Now, typically when you're making salsa, it is standard to peel your tomatoes. You can do that by cutting an X at the bottom, just, you know, and you're not like, just slightly. Drop them into some boiling water and, you know, pretty much you're blanching. Drop them into some boiling water and plunge them into cold water to stop any cooking that may have, you know, be occurring, and then you should be able to pretty much peel those tomato skins right off. You will see amongst other canners, it's a preferential step in canning anything with tomatoes. My family has never complained about me leaving the skins on. There are some recipes where I do make that additional step, but my salsa is not one of them. It does not bother us to leave the skins on. In my garden, I practice organic gardening. I do not put anything on my vegetables. I actually don't really even use any organic stuff on my vegetables. I don't have any pests that I find that necessary. I have I have the standard pests like everybody else does, but I guess I just sort of take the risk and deal with it as it comes, but I've not really had to contend to too many issues in terms of needing an actual like insecticide or anything. So I don't spray anything, and I'm comfortable using the vegetables that come out of my garden just as they are. So if I were to get this maybe from a farmer's market, I probably would take that step just because I don't necessarily know how they handled their vegetables. Besides that, it can be off-putting to some people to have the tomato skin left on. And so, yeah, you just have to kind of make that decision for yourself. I will cut away any spots that just don't look super pretty, and usually it's just skin surface, or it's just, yeah, skin surface. It's on the surface of the skin. Anything that runs super deep, then of course I will cut away and check and make sure that it's still good. You want to use tomatoes that still has some firmness to them. You don't want a super overripe tomato. Go ahead and stick those ones into the freezer. Those make great tomatoes for your sauce. I keep wanting to say salsa. Those make great tomatoes for your sauces, your marinaras. But you do want a tomato with a little bit of a bite to it, in my opinion. Those are the ones you want to use for your salsas. This is a water bath recipe. So I know you and I have been in the kitchen pressure canning. This is our first water bath recipe together. So some of you might feel more at ease with water bath canning first. And salsa is an incredible recipe to start with. Quite honestly, a lot of people know about water bath canning because of jams and jellies, but I actually find jams and jellies to be a lot more work and a little bit more daunting to try and can, because when working with pectin especially, it can be frustrating if it doesn't set properly, and you can be left feeling like maybe you did something wrong and maybe you shouldn't be canning, and those are not feelings I want you to be left with when you're first trying out preserving for the first time. Salsa isn't as basic of a recipe as you could ever come across when it comes to water bath canning. The hardest part is standing here chopping all of your vegetables, and it's not that it's difficult, it's a time-consuming task, of course, and there's a lot of different ways you could do this. I'm sure there's people who will put it up in a blender. You could have a big chopper that you just put all your vegetables in. I will do that with my onions. I will put them through a chopper to make the process a lot simpler. I don't like my salsa like blended. I like having the little bit of the chunked diced tomatoes in there, so that too is preference. You may not care. You may decide it all tastes the same at the end of the day and you want to do what's quick and easy. You know, by all means, go ahead and do it that way. And then once you have all these chopped up, we're adding some vinegar and a little bit of cumin for this particular recipe, and you're done. So I will say there's some recipes that you can be very creative with, okay? You can change up this or that. You can sub out this ingredient and add that ingredient. When it comes to water bathing, you don't have as great of a leash, so to speak, as you do with pressure canning. Water bath canning, depending on the items you're water bathing, does come down to science. And by that, I mean tomatoes, we know, are an acidic fruit. So there are a lot of water bath recipes using tomatoes that you don't have to pressure can. I could take crushed whole tomatoes, pureed tomatoes, tomato juice, and put them all through the water bath. However, onions, garlic, and peppers are not a high acid food. Those need to be pressure canned. But I'm not pressure canning this recipe, I'm putting it into the water bath like I said. So how am I doing that? Between the acid that the tomato is creating, that environment by just naturally being a high acidic food, we are also adding vinegar to amp up the acid that is in this recipe. And that creates an acidic environment so that those peppers and onions can be in this recipe safely. However, this is a tested recipe. That means they have tested this recipe and they know that the formula they used and the ratios that they used are safe. So if it calls for, well, let's just take a look at it. It calls for 7 cups of tomatoes, 2 cups of onions, and a total of 1 cup of diced bell pepper, and then 8 jalapenos, okay? Well, if I put in 4 cups of onion because say I really like onion and I don't alter anything else in this recipe, I have now offset my ratio of acid versus non-acid foods. And that would not be safe to do. Where can you have your variance then? Well, if you don't like spicy, you know, if you're thinking 8 jalapenos would be way too spicy for us, you can add a little bit more of your bell peppers, as long as at the end of the recipe, everything you have in your pot is equal amounts. You can alter your ingredients in that way. So as long as your ratios stay the same, it does not matter if you have 6 jalapenos and 1.5 cups of bell peppers. Does that make sense? I hope I'm making sense for you. There is a ratio of acidic food and non-acidic food, and as long as you stay within that ratio, your canning method will be safe. The other option you could do, especially with these ball canning recipe books, there are other recipes you could follow that don't have any spice in it. And sometimes there's even notes on the side that'll say suggestions or tips or variances that you could follow, so that you know you're not guessing and you're following the recipe safely. So the recipe I'm using calls for 7 cups of diced tomatoes. So I'm going to measure out until I don't have any tomatoes left, and then I will see how many onions and peppers I can use. Back to the ratio of making sure I'm staying within the ratio of the tomatoes versus my pepper and onion. So let me get a spoon. This is an 8-cup measure, so I'm going to fill it almost to the top. Girl, it's almost your dinner time, huh? Okay, 2 batches. And I can tell you, I am going to be a little bit heavy on the tomato, but that's okay because that's the acidic part of my recipe. I want to stay within the guidelines of my peppers and onions though. So that means, it's chicken food, I need, if I'm doing this now, times 3. My single recipe calls for 2 cups of chopped onions, so I'm going to get 6 cups of chopped onions. I'm going to get 3 cups of bell peppers chopped up, and I'm going to now have Sadie, that's enough. I'm going to now have 24 jalapeno peppers. to slice up. I'm actually going to do a mixture of these spicy peppers that I have in my garden. So jalapenos, banana peppers, serranos, and I don't know what these are that I'm growing, but they're spicy. So I'm gonna go pick a couple more peppers. I'm gonna get everything chopped up and we'll get going with the next step. So I just chopped up 8 jalapenos to get an idea about how many cups that would be. And it looks to be eight jalapenos is about 1 cup. So this way I know my other hot peppers, how much I can use. And so I have 3 cups of bell peppers that I get to use. 8 jalapenos is about 1 cup, and I want to use 3 times the recipe. So I'm going to get 2 more cups of spicy peppers chopped up, and then I will do my 3 cups of sweet as well. So the rest of the ingredients that we are going to be adding is 3 jars of tomato paste. I do believe I forgot to mention it at the beginning of the video. Cumin, cilantro, and vinegar. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of this in there, and I'm going to show you what the inside of the pot is looking like. And this has to cook bring it to a boil, and then turn that down and simmer it at a high simmer. You know, you don't want it to low simmer, but it doesn't need to stay at a boil the entire time for 30 minutes. So that's 2 1/4 cup of vinegar going in for my canning recipe. We're going to do a 1/2 teaspoon of cumin. I love cumin, so I'm going to do 3 heaping teaspoons. You can taste test this before it goes into your jars, and then you could always add a little bit more. And then a 1/2 cup of loosely packed cilantro. I don't have fresh cilantro, but I have my freeze-dried, works just as well. And I'm not really measuring. I'm going to do like a good handful pinch as a 1/2 cup. And we'll call that good. It has now started to come to a boil, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. I have been stirring it from time to time because you don't want to have the bottom scorched at all. So I'm going to set a timer, and in 30 minutes we will begin to jar up our salsa. Now at this point, when you're stirring, anytime from now to 30 minutes from now, if you're tempted to take any out and put it in a tiny little bowl to taste it, I am here to tell you I support that decision 100%. You really do want to taste the things when you're able to anyhow, because however it tastes right now is how it's going to taste once it goes into the jar. Yes, it will process a little bit longer once it's in the canner, but essentially, you know, your flavors are going to be what they are. And so maybe you decide you need to add a little bit more cumin. Maybe you decide it's a little bit too spicy and you want to add something to kind of offset that. So you definitely want to taste things when you're able to. You can also see that there's been a lot of liquid added. As these cook down, it becomes such a wonderful, thick salsa. It's just so pretty. So I will probably, in about 10 to 15 minutes, I probably will remove some, let it cool a little bit while it continues to cook down, and I will taste it and see how it's doing. We are getting close to being able to jar these up, and I actually just remembered that this is not our first water bath experience with each other. We already did peach salsa, so this is our second water bath session with one another. Salsa still, but a little different, and in my opinion a little less time consuming, because with the peach salsa, of course, we had to blanch and prep all of those peaches. So it was just one added little step, but basically pretty much the same in most regards. So I'm going to start pulling out my jars from the canner one by one. I'm going to empty the water that's in it. We're going to get them filled up. And we're going to hopefully get as many as I had planned for. So we'll see. Okay, now with salsa, I do believe probably of all kinds, but this is where you're going to check your recipe and your book. We're going to do a 1/2 inch of headspace. Debubble, and then I'm going to check my headspace. That's why this debubbler is so useful, because it does have the measurements there for you on checking your headspace. And basically what you're looking for when you're checking headspace is you want whatever the product is in your jar, you want it to touch just underneath the lowest part. So when I do that, it is in fact a 1/2 inch headspace. So we are good there. I'm going to get some vinegar on my rag. I'm going to wipe my rim of my jar. And you can see there is a little bit of sauce on there, which is exactly why we want to wipe away before placing our lid, which these have been washed, and our ring, fingertip tight, and we're going to put this into the bath. Okay, we are basically going to rinse and repeat. If you want a in-depth tutorial on how to fill the jars, step by step what to do, go check out my video that I have up on canning chicken tortilla soup. The product is different, but the steps are the same no matter what we're canning. That is for my very brand new canners. It's a step-by-step, and I explain a lot of why we're doing what we're doing in that video. So I do suggest you go and check that out. Those look beautiful. Okay, so pints process for 20 minutes. Remember, you need to check your elevation and add 5 minutes for every bracket of elevation that you move up in. So my elevation, I add 5 minutes, and so I processed for 25 minutes. Now, when you are processing, the process times are generally only for pints and quarts. Occasionally, you might come across a special processing time for half pints. The rule of thumb when processing something smaller than pints is you round up to a pint, basically. So even though this is smaller, I still process for the same time that I do the pint. They do sell, it's hard to find, certain brands have them, pint and a half jars. You will not see any recipes calling for the process time for a pint and a half. You would round up to the nearest size jar, which means pint and a halves you process for quart time. So pints and smaller still process for the same amount that a full pint would, which is why you can combine them in the same canning jar, in the same canner, and process it for one batch. So these processed for 20 minutes, 25 minutes with my elevation time. I've got my last canner here that just buzzed, so I turned the stove off. I'll let it sit there for a good 10 minutes. I'll take the lid off. I did not lock my lid in because we're not pressure canning. I'm just using that canner as a water bath canner. It's just easiest for me than digging out my actual water bath. I don't know. I just like doing it this way. So I'll remove the lid and I will wait another 5 minutes before pulling the jars out, and I will show you the final amount that we did today. So the recipe I used said it would make 5 pints. We tripled it. I got 14. So I will say, all in all, for canning math, that's actually pretty incredible. So I really hope you try this recipe. If you have any questions about canning, please put it down in the comments below. This is what I'm here for, to help you. I know you're new at this, but this recipe here, canning any sort of salsa, is probably my first recommendation for anyone who's never canned before. Especially a water bathing recipe can be really simple for you to test your new skill set out on. So I will see you the next time I'm here in the kitchen preparing something for my pantry. I can't wait to see you again. Have a good day.